Hey everybody, welcome to another edition of Think with a Drink. This is the webinar series brought to you by the Ares Foundation for Financial Education. And Craig, today we've got a fun one for everybody. This is 6 blunders of a 401k plan. So next slide, just real quick with an introduction to us. My name is Tom Alessi. I am the president of the Ares Foundation. I have been in financial services for 24 years now, actually, Craig, into my 25th year. I'm an investment advisor. That means I act as a fiduciary whenever giving guidance or advice to any of my clients. Craig, if you want to introduce yourself.
Sure. So I'm Craig Richardson. I am the vice president of the Ares Foundation. I've been in financial services a little over 20 years now, and I specialize in working with families and individuals to help them define their financial goals and have a better relationship with their money.
Next slide. So Craig will be chiming in as we go along through this. As we said, this is brought to you by the Ares Foundation for Financial Education. You can visit us on the web. It's aresfoundation.org. Our mission is trying to help everyone have a better relationship with their money, because whether you realize it or not, you are in a relationship with money, and just like every other personal relationship that you have, there are behaviors and triggers that can cause us to act, well, Craig and I like to say, a little irrationally sometimes when it comes to dealing with our money and our finances. All Craig, myself, everybody at Ares tries to do is take a little bit of that emotion out of dealing with your money. Next slide. So one of the things you can do for us is you can follow us. We're on social media all over the place. That's LinkedIn, Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, whatever your channel of choice is. Do us a favor, reach out, follow us, like us, have a little fun with it. We're trying to do as much as we can to get the word out to everybody. Next slide.
We're not on TikTok yet, though.
No TikTok yet. Who knows what's going on with that. So our agenda real quick for everybody is we're going to talk about what we're drinking. This is Think with a Drink after all. The 6 blunders, we will go through with them. In that, we'll also do what we call a misbehaving with money minute, just some things and some tips and some ideas for people, and why these blunders matter to you, and then a little quick call to action, okay? All right, so next slide. So what we're drinking in today's show, as you can see in the little thing there, this is Flannel Fest. It's right in tune here with the October, the fall time frame, Craig. You know, this is very caramel, very malty, sort of done off a fest beer type of format in terms of what you're dealing with. I honestly don't know if this was Sam Adams taking a dig at another local brewer here in Boston. Harpoon has done for a long period of time their Flannel Friday. So I'm not sure if Flannel Fest was a takeoff and they're trying to do it. It's very similar in terms of what the cans and the packaging and everything looked like. So it's an interesting little dynamic, but skål.
Skål.
We've got our custom little Ares mugs here.
Well, I do enjoy this time of year.
Yes, the deeper, darker, the better. Next slide. All right, so we're going to go from 6 down to 1 here in terms of blunders. And blunder number 6, Craig, is really taking too little risk with your plan, right? So, and I think we see this a lot, especially as people tend to get older, you get more conservative.
Yep.
But in this case, it's almost like we sit down with people who have like almost 100% of their portfolio in cash. They're in the money market account.
Correct, and that's because we're emotional creatures. Right? We invest based on how we're feeling about things, and as you're getting closer to retirement, sometimes you feel, I got to protect the principal, not realizing I may spend 30 years in retirement.
And that is a big factor, right? So a lot of times it comes down to what is it you're trying to accomplish and whether or not it makes sense, because, excuse me, up until the most recent time frame, cash, especially cash in retirement plans, was paying nothing.
Right.
You were getting very, very little return, and you weren't even in a low inflationary environment not keeping pace. Nowadays, with the length and height and amount of inflation that's going on, having money sitting on the sidelines, i.e. in cash, is falling behind. You're lagging in terms of the return.
Well, I think the other reason too is a lot of times when people get a little bit older, they end up investing their own money. Like a lot of times their biggest investment was inside their 401k plan or 403b plan, and that's kind of managed by that fund company.
Right.
And you're getting a little bit of advice and guidance as you go along, but then you retire and you move the money into, say, your own IRA. But now you're responsible for managing those funds, and you don't know what to do and afraid to make a mistake, and so you stay really conservative.
Right. So it's just something in terms of dealing with looking at this. Next slide, because you can go through it in terms of the overall view of that. So this just talks about the risk versus return, and we understand one of the reasons behind this is, everybody's worried about the downturns that occur. And yes, as we get closer to retirement, the ability to weather that downturn comes dramatic. It becomes a factor when dealing with it. But as Craig said, you really have to be thinking of this. I'm not just trying to get to that end line, 65 or 67 or whatever age it is. I'm trying to get to 80 or 85 or 90, make my money last until that length of time.
Well, I tell a lot of people that, if I knew exactly how long you were going to live, right, and I knew how much money you had or could potentially have, it's really simple. You just do the division and you know how much you have to live on every month. But the issue is you don't have that crystal ball. Am I going to live 5 years? Am I going to live 50 years? And the issue is you don't want to run out of money before you run out of life.
Exactly. So next slide. So we'll go to blunder number 5 here. And blunder number 5 is sort of twofold. This gets into handling the makeup, the asset allocation in the portfolio. And the first part of that is relying or not rebalancing your account. So if you go to the next slide, you'll see this in pretty easy fashion here. This is if you look at a portfolio, let's just say that portfolio was set up, you just would need to click that again, just in the background there. There you go. So you'd have 4 funds, and I've got 4 funds that are 25, 25, 25, 25, right? To make up 100%, I've got 4 funds.
If I do the math right, yeah, that's 100%.
That's 100%. But here's the thing, I'm going to tell you, if you looked at that portfolio a year from now, that portfolio is not going to have 4 funds with 25, 25, 25, 25.
Right.
Something's going to have done well, something's going to have done bad. And for most, specifically in retirement plans or just investors in general, usually all we're doing is opening up the statement and seeing whether or not we're up or down.
Correct.
We're not looking at how the allocation or what's gone on inside the portfolio. And so what you end up with is a portfolio that's a little bit out of round in that scenario. So I've got 4 funds, but now one is done well and one is done poorly, and so now I'm overweighted where I didn't want to be.
So you say I moved the money into my own account. Now I'm managing it. I got it set up, and then I have to now maintain it too. I have to go through it and rebalance it.
You've got to stay on top of that, because here's what happens is that one fund that runs up, well, now that's suddenly overweighted. It's got more of the portfolio, and inevitably things are going to cycle, right? We're going to go have a cycling that's going to occur. That fund is going to lose, and if it's now overweighted, well, okay, now I'm back to where I was, but I just lost a big chunk of money.
Yes.
Instead of rebalancing it to the point where you're in control of it. The second part of blunder number 5, and it's funny because we're going to do a show in a little bit, that's going to come up in a couple of weeks about the glide path, about target date investing. And here's the thing with target date investing. This is a glide path that pretty much every single fund starts out very, very aggressively. And then slowly over time gets you to close to your age 65. That's the target date. But at that point, we're in a 50-50 scenario. So I'm 50%, when I say 50-50, I mean 50% equities, 50% bonds and cash at retirement. This is the conversation that we were having before, where it's that not enough risk, because the target date doesn't go to like an 80-20 split until 10 years, some cases 15 years after you retire.
Well, I was going to hit the little buzzer to shock you with, so you can say, what is a target date?
That's what I'm wearing. I'm wearing my thing.
What is a target dated fund?
Target dated fund, you'll find these in your retirement accounts. So in the retirement accounts, what you're going to find is a date that says, I'm going to retire, my age 65 is 20 years from now. So I'm in the 20, would be the 2045 fund. That's the closest one to that date.
Yep.
That's when I'm going to retire. And all this does is it manages your risk as it goes along. The problem is it starts out so aggressively, 80, 85% in equities. You may not be somebody who wants to handle that, or the other way around, it may be taking, way too much risk as that glide path goes the other way for what you're trying to achieve. You may be a late earner, maybe a late contributor. You want to maintain that higher risk.
So the glide path is really just the adjustment of your risk as you get closer to retirement, correct?
Correct.
Right. So as you get closer to retirement, the funds become more conservative.
The funds become more conservative. That is the glide path. That is the theory. Except for that, the target. What trips most people up is they think the target date, so the 2045 in my previous example, was that you're now in a very, very conservative portfolio.
Which may not necessarily be true.
It's not true. And the reality is almost all of them are at least at 50-50, 50% equities and 50%. So a balanced or moderate risk profile at retirement.
So you could be taking more risk than you're comfortable with, is what you're saying.
Correct. Yes, absolutely. All right, next slide. Blunder number 4, mishandling old plans. We see this one over and over and over again. This is, I've got money sitting at my old company and I've just left it there. And the problem with that is sometimes you don't know what that mix was. You're not aware of what's happening with it. They could have moved the plan and then moved you all to cash because you didn't make an election. And guess what? Now we're in blunder number 6 on top of blunder number 4.
Well, yeah, I think you're right. I think it's enough to manage the current plan that you're in. Forget about the old plan that you had left behind. Now you're not even paying attention or logging into that account because you're no longer with that employer.
Right. If you can click to the next slide. Sorry, Craig. I didn't mean to stop.
That's okay. And sometimes people even forget they have the plan altogether.
Right.
And we've seen that happen.
Right. And so that's where the old 401k, right? So there's really 4 things you can do with an old employer plan. You can leave it where it is if you have more than 5,000 as of December of 2023. That number will go to 7,000. If you have more than 7,000 in your plan, you can leave it where it is. You can, roll it into your new employer if you left your old employer, new employer plan, if the plan allows for that. You can roll the funds into an IRA, right? This is now, like Craig said, now you're controlling it, you have it. Or the last one on the bottom there is cash it out. And cash it out, I will tell you, the problem with that is that you wind up with ordinary income tax, so federal and state. If you're under 59.5, there's an additional 10% penalty on top of it.
Yeesh.
And you're never going to get that back, right? So you really, in today's world with the tax rates where they are talking about somewhere between a 30 and 35% tax bite with the penalty. So you're only going to get 65% of your money. Now, we say this to people all the time, but the reality is 25 or a little bit more than 20, but less than 25% of all distributions are cash outs. People taking their money out because they're not thinking about that future compounding of interest, the pre-tax benefit there, all the things that go along with it. So just be aware that you should know where your old money is, and then decide how you're going to handle it, how it's going to work with your current portfolio.
Well, Uncle Sam likes it, though. No, they're getting your tax money, they're getting a 10% penalty on top of it.
Absolutely. All right, so we're going to introduce a new segment for us. So if you can flip up the new slide, we are introducing what we are calling a Misbehaving with Money Minute. We're not going to take a long time doing these, but it's just every now and then we get stuff that comes to us, clients, people who ask us questions, or we sit down with them and go through stuff, and it creates this problem. So this minute, so the next slide there, and this one is really, it's forgetting to cancel old subscriptions or things that you are no longer using. And we bring this up during the 6 blunders of the 401k because ultimately this comes down to knowing your cash flow. Knowing what you're spending your money on, how much you're spending it on, because one of the things we hear all the time is, I don't have enough money.
Right.
Well, if you stayed on top of this and actually looked at it, and it's big business in terms of the subscription services that just continually charge you because you didn't go through the process or give them the proper notice or tell them whatever you needed to.
Yeah, I mean, let's think about it. If I have a subscription service, and let's say it started off back at $6.99 when I first started getting it, right? I'm not tracking $7 a month. Right? But they've got millions of people who aren't tracking $7 a month. Well, that's millions of dollars a month that they're making because no one's tracking this.
Yes.
And now you've got 20 subscription services, you're not even watching the first 5 that you put on.
Right. So it's just be aware, this is something to help. If you need to go through your monthly expenses, need to figure out exactly what you're spending the money on, where it's going, and whether or not you're actually utilizing it or it's worth your time to keep it. All right, on to the blunders. Blunder number 3, not maximizing the employer match. So this depends on your company, but most employers out there are doing what is known as a match. A match means that for every dollar you contribute, your employer is giving you anywhere from usually 25 cents to the full dollar. And it's up to a certain percentage. So one of the things Craig and I talk to everybody about is what we call maxing to the match. Because you can go to the next slide, this is free money. This is free money for everybody. And my quote on there, as you can see, is free money is the best kind of money.
Absolutely it is.
And you can quote me on that.
You already did.
But the concept here is to figure out exactly what your employer is matching. The dollar amount, whatever the percentage is, 3%, 4%, 6%, whatever that number is, and figure out to make sure that you can get to that number. Because then you're going to maximize the match available to you. And if you can't right out of the gate, this is a conversation, we said, well, then do 2, but then try to get to, in 6 months or a year, to 3, and then 4, and then 5, because you want to get to the max, because this is money that is free, and your employer is putting it in there for you.
Yeah, they're not going to go backwards, and you're going to say, well, I'm going to put more in now, and we'll give you back that match I never got. Right? So this is something you want to do while it's being offered. And, not every employer offers it. More of them are now.
Yeah.
But like I said, if you're trying to, where else can you double your money?
Right.
Where else can you double your money with no risk? I mean.
Next slide, please. Blunder number 2. Oh yeah, I forgot the free money keeps going. Keeps getting bigger and bigger and bigger because it's growing. That's the idea. Blunder number 2 is taking a loan from your retirement account. So we understand there are times that this comes up. Everybody went through COVID, everybody went through the pandemic in terms of going through that. Yes, I needed to get money out. And there are specific reasoning for doing that. First-time home buyer, major medical, kids' education type of thing, which are all benefits to be done. The problem is when we take money out of our retirement account, we're taking it out of the market. It's no longer working for us. I understand it's doing something for you with whatever you purchased, but it's no longer invested. And the reality to that, the next slide, this just shows you the returns. Had you stayed fully invested for a time period, and we're talking about just removing, these are certain days of the markets, right, that you weren't invested. So if you literally just pulled out for a couple of days, you drop from you have to turn around, 7.7, you missed the best day of the year, because I can't read that far, 3.8%. It's almost half. You lose almost half the return. That's by missing the single best day. Missing the two best days, you drop down to almost no return. You've lost almost the whole 7% there. And then you start missing better days, 5, 10, 20 days, and you've got negative returns. The whole idea is you've taken the money out. Now, we understand, like we said, if you're in a situation you need to have it happen, absolutely. But otherwise, part of this is, let's make sure that we're doing it for the right reasons. Taking it out to go on a vacation or, to buy a boat or something is not beneficial in terms of what you're trying to deal with.
Well, I think the other myth, though, is that people say, well, I'm taking it out, but I'm also paying interest to myself, so am I really losing anything?
Right.
But you are, because you're the one who's putting in the additional contribution now.
Right, and the other part to it with the loans is that if you separate from service with a loan, the loan is due. The loan is due within 60 days notice, and it literally has to be repaid within 90 days. If you don't repay it, if you don't have the money and you don't repay it, it becomes a distribution. Yeah, it doesn't show up on a balance sheet. Nobody says, hey, you defaulted on this loan, but you owe taxes, and if you're under 59.5, 10% pre-penalty, and there we are again, and we've lost 30 to 35% of our money. Okay, last one, blunder number one. Drum roll, please. Blunder number one is not signing up to participate in a 401k, 403b retirement offered by your employer. I can't tell you the number of people. Craig and I deal with a lot of plans. We deal with a lot of organizations, a lot of businesses, the number of people who don't sign up. A lot of times it's for, trying to catch up on the money. A lot of times it's, I'm trying to figure things out. I'm not sure where to invest. There's a number of excuses that are used with that. But the reality is, next slide. The reality is that a lot of times what we hear is, and you got to forgive us, but that's the savings train pulling into the station, and the savings train just never comes into the station, is what happens. Somebody in their 20s that's like, well, I have student loans, I'm going to pay those off, then I'll get in.
Right.
Or then, we're going to get married, so we got to deal with that, then we'll get in. We're having a baby, we're going to buy a house, and next thing you know, you're 45 years old and you haven't started to save for retirement yet.
Yeah, but if I'm in my 20s, geez, retirement's like 2-3 lifetimes away. Why am I worried about that? I got plenty of time to worry about retirement.
I agree with you, and there's other things that it can be spent on and other stuff that you can do. However, as we talked about, if you're just at least getting in and there's an employer match that's going along with that, now I'm getting free money on top of it. And the reason for it is that second part. If you can go back to the slide for a second, that we're having fun with the whole train thing. For anybody who's ever ridden the tube in London, when you pull into a station, they say mind the gap. That's the distance between the train door and the station platform. But mind the gap in this conversation is about Social Security, which will provide so much money, and what you need in retirement, which is going to be this amount. That gap is something you have to fill in. That's your responsibility, to fill in the gap in your own retirement. And the only way that you're ever going to be able to do that is if you are contributing or putting money away, regardless of how many more lifetimes away it has to be.
Or I could just win the lottery.
That's a different conversation. That's a different style in terms of dealing with this. But those are literally all of the blunders, and as you go through it and try to figure it out, it's trying to understand where you are in relation to what it is you're trying to accomplish, right? What are my goals? Where am I going to be? And how am I going to get there? And so you want to make sure that you're lining this up in such a way that you've got it set and you know what the outcome is going to be ultimately.
Yeah, and I think one of the blunder too that a lot of people make that we don't have on this list is not seeking out professional guidance. Getting somebody who can be not emotionally tied to what's going on with your investments. Because that's where a lot of the mistakes happen. You see the market start to come down and you move to a safe position. And then you're not back in time, and so you miss the ups. It's all these emotional mistakes that people make that can end up costing them tens, if not hundreds of thousands of dollars over the life of their investments.
Right, absolutely. And that is one. So as you go through them, and just to recap again, the idea there is you want to just be aware of what your overall portfolio is. Not only your active one, but your other monies. Like Craig said, you've got money all over the place. How are they all interacting with each other? What are they doing? Are you taking enough risk, or you're not taking too much risk, right? Have you looked at them in terms of how they are balanced, not only in themselves, but against everything else you're trying to achieve, right? And you want to make sure that if there is a match that's being given, that you participate in the plan, at least to get some percentage of that. Like I said, if you even do just like 1 or 2%, at least you're getting some of that money.
Absolutely.
Because your employer's never going to catch up with you. They're never going to come and say, here's where you're at, or hey, you've been contributing, you've only been contributing 1% for the last 3 years. We're going to up you to the 5 for there. That's not going to happen in terms of dealing with it.
The other big thing too is remember that you can't go backwards. Right. So everybody's made some financial blunders. It's not here to judge anybody or yourself in that regard. It's what can I do better moving forward? When you know better, you do better. So just take stock of wherever you are, and start putting a plan together to move forward from there.
Next slide. So, here's with our offer that we say to everybody. Look, we're here to try to help get a handle. That QR code, if you scan that, if you stop the recording or the TV show and just scan that QR code, it'll open up our calendar. We're happy to have a conversation with you. As Craig said, sometimes it's a good idea just to have somebody else looking at things. In this case, you really can't get a second opinion from the person who set up your portfolio, right? There's no way to get a second opinion from whoever set up your plan. So this gives you an opportunity maybe to have a second set of eyes or just discourse and conversation about what's happening and what's occurring with everything. But if you can go back to that slide one more time, just so everybody can see it, just again, that QR code, just take your phone out, shoot the QR code, it'll open up the calendar link, and you can just schedule a time right from there. Right. And go ahead.
Yeah, and I was going to say, and sometimes the biggest thing is to take the small action, like shooting the QR code and having a conversation. Change starts with the smallest step, and a lot of times people just can't make that first one. So if for some reason you're watching this show, you had an interest, you have a concern, something's on your mind, reach out. We are more than happy to have a conversation.
Next slide. So ways you can get in touch with us besides the QR code, right? So our website, again, it's aresfoundation.org. If you do the /contact, if you just go to the site, you can see the contact page. But if you do aresfoundation.org /contact, it'll open up our contact us page, and you can go from there. The scheduling, that's a link that you can use, which is the same thing as the QR code. So that's the schedule that meeting in case it's easier for you to just copy that down instead of shooting the QR code. You can just copy that link off of there. Our email is info@aresfoundation.org. So if you want to reach out to us or have a question or a concern or something, you can shoot the email. And then Craig mentioned, we keep pushing, but our Instagram channel there, Ares4Financial. We don't have TikTok. At some point, maybe I'll get us onto TikTok. But for right now, these are the ways that you can get a hold of us. That's the easiest thing to do from there. I will say one of the things for everybody is to just take a moment, take a step back, look at your portfolio, specifically if you're participating in a retirement plan, what you've done and what your original allocation is, because that's one of the strategies with it is look at what you're contributing, that percentage from your paycheck, where it's going in your portfolio, and then look at what the current portfolio actually has. The numbers should match up. If the numbers don't match up, then you need to rebalance or do something or take steps and measures to make a change.
Right, absolutely. You're in charge of your financial future. Now's the time to take some charge of it.
Correct. And on that note, we're going to say thanks and have a great evening.